In 1982, the personal computer was named Time magazine's Machine of the Year, and the film Tron featured the first major use of computer-generated imagery.
You already know my name, and you can see that I'm a machine.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Yes.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bogutska, your podcast host. I'm a critic and the author of the book Feeding the Monster. And in this series of the show, I'm journeying through the intersections of horror and technology, from the first robots of the silent era to the most recent AI villains. Over the next few months, we are deep diving into machines. Every episode, I'm joined by a guest to discuss a film or two and how it captures our fears and anxieties around technology and the place it holds in our lives. Let me tell you, I've been waiting to record this episode for years. Not only because we're now entering the turbulent period of the 80s where computers started becoming more ever-present and computer-generated imagery started entering filmmaking in a big bad way, but also because it is finally time for me to talk about one of my all-time favorite films of all time, Blade Runner. For anyone who's not seen the original Ridley Scott film, do yourself a favor, pause this chat and go discover it. The final cut, obviously. Set in a dystopian Los Angeles in 2019, Harrison Ford plays Rick Deckard, a replicant hunter who is forced to find and eliminate 4 escaped replicants. Joining me in this episode to discuss one of our mutual old-timers is Vulture critic Roxana Hadadi. In the second part of the conversation, we also revisit Denis Villeneuve's sequel to the classic Blade Runner 2049, where another replicant hunter, this time played by Ryan Gosling, stumbles upon a stunning discovery that may destabilize the order of things between humans and replicants. This conversation is completely full of spoilers and speculation. Remember to subscribe and review the podcast if you enjoy this episode or are in fact enjoying this season as a whole, and you can see what other films I'm going to be covering over on our Letterboxd page, which is linked in the show notes below. You can always let me know your thoughts on whether Roy Batty deserves justice by dropping me a line on hello@thefinalghost.co.uk. I always love hearing from listeners and your theories on the films we discuss. And if you wish to support the podcast, you can also find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefinalgirls. And with all of that said, please enjoy our conversation about Blade Runner. Considering that I'm doing a whole last season about technology gone wrong and technology wanting to kill us, the fact that this has been the first technical malfunction that I've had so far.
Honestly, so
great.
funny. So funny. I love that. We're just on theme.
Exactly. Everything is on theme. We've warmed up talking about just people having to do their fucking job and just get in line. We've warmed up with a technical gremlin almost ruining the connection and giving me a mini heart attack. We're ready. We're pumped. We're here to talk about Blade Runner. Here we go.
Yes,
Roxana,
that's exactly
so lovely to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here to talk about... Man, there's so much to talk about with this, so I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes.
Listen, I have questions, but I also have so many feelings, so who knows? My questions might go out the window.
That's fine.
But let me start with one, kind of something to warm us up a bit more. Can you tell me, do you remember what was the first piece of technology that you owned?
You gave me a little preview of this question. We're like peeking behind the curtain now. And this was a really interesting thing to think about because I was like, what are we describing as tech and as like my individual tech? because I started thinking about like family-owned technology. We had a VCR player, which I broke watching and rewatching Hook over and over again over the course of a weekend. Yeah, so I was like remembering that experience. And then I think we are about the same age, but I might be a little bit older than you. So I believe that I was in 4th or 5th grade when we got the family computer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had like the family computer, you had dial-up internet. I have very strong memories of picking up the phone and hearing the modem, all of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I was thinking a lot about like collective technology that lived in my home. But I think that the individual thing that I had is we were not allowed to have a phone. Again, you had like a family cell phone for emergencies, but I think that I was it might have been freshman year of high school, it might have been sophomore year, and my brother got me a Microsoft, I think they were called the Zune.
I remember the
right?
Zune?
Yeah, I had a Zune, and so it was like the predecessor to the iPod, right? It was like a step up from Walkman. Oh, I did have a Walkman. I forgot that. But again, is the Walkman tech arguable? Not as much tech as the Zune, I don't think. So yeah, I distinctly remember having this like sort of like half of a floppy disk shaped music player. And I remember using our very bad dial-up connection and some definitely not illegal websites to download music and put it on my Zune. And that thing really lasted me. I had that through senior year of college. So it lasted, I think, like 7 or 8 years. It was pretty solid. And I think the only reason that I stopped using it is I think maybe they stopped pushing out software updates. I think it was like a boom and bust for Microsoft and they stopped supporting it. So I was like forced to stop using it rather than wanting to stop using it. Like I loved that thing. So yeah, it was really fun going back to that memory of hearing a song on the radio, deciding I wanted to download it, going on AOL Instant Messenger and just like chatting with people until the song was downloaded, putting it on my Zune, and then I don't know what I was doing. I was like goth and moody, so probably just like walking around listening to music.
Oh my god, it's the whole process. It's too,
Yes.
I mean, I sound like such an old person now, but I kind of love the many steps that it used to take.
Yes.
You know, and I similarly, I do love that you can just press on the integrated Spotify link and TikTok and then you immediately have the song added to your liked songs. That's very comfortable for me. I don't remember any of the names of those songs in the way that I do when I had to listen to it, remember a lyric, find the lyric that would lead me to the song, then find the song on definitely not illegal websites, and then, you know, put it on my little, you know, CD that I would burn on a specific playlist that had a specific mood and a specific title that I would hand paint on it. That's, you know, hobbies. I miss
hobbies, absolutely. Hobbies, and like, I'm sure that you've talked a lot about this in other episodes, and you and I have just talked about it as like people, is like a level of intentionality and deliberate action that you don't have as much with the immediate, I like this song, let me click on it and add it to my playlist or whatever, right? It's not the same level of investment. Like, I really fucking liked that Placebo song to find out what it was, download it, use whatever USB cord to put it on my Zune. You remember how you had to like listen to the songs all the way through to make sure that it was the correct song? And that after like 30 seconds it didn't like switch to being something else? The kids don't understand what we were going through.
The way, also the first like, the way that people manipulated things that they put on the illegal websites is amazing. Remind me,
Mhm.
one of my first jobs, this is a slight digression, but to the point, one of my first tasks and one of my first jobs was to create a fake version of a film that we were working on to be seeded into pirating websites.
Okay.
And basically I re-edited the entire film to make it look like it was the real thing, but it wasn't. It was just a montage of all of the scenes of the character closing and opening doors.
Love that. Excellent.
Yeah, love it. That's a real job that I had to do. Sometimes I miss those times, but anyway.
Yeah, I agree. We could do this for hours. So I will no longer digress.
One of the kind of the central theme of this season really is this intersection between horror and technology, and I think sci-fi, as we're going to talk about Blade Runner, is a huge element of that. What is the most interesting thing to you about this intersection?
Oh man. I think probably the most interesting thing to me, and I hope that this is not a vague answer, but I think so much of the fear that I feel when it comes to sci-fi is so much of it goes back to just Philip K. Dick, who I absolutely have read the most of, and I definitely have like a larger blind spot in terms of the other sort of formative sci-fi of the genre, just because I was always a Dick girl, but I said it, so what does it even matter? But yes, he was always my guy. And I feel like what he did so well, and what was horror for me, is his ability to create these really distinct worlds and timelines in which you recognize like half of it as being from your own world and feeling like something tangible and familiar. And then the other half of it is just this like insane, paranoid, absurdist, surreal, amplified version of all of these things in our society that are meant to like subjugate and oppress you. And so I think the horror for me was always in his ability to create this balance between, and this comes up in Blade Runner, this balance between the things that you see as human and the things that you see perhaps as more human than human. And how do those things make you feel less human than human? So the horror for me, I think, was always in sort of this like mental, existential questioning of what humanity is and like what our function is in a world that, because of tech or because of capitalism or because of quote unquote progress, feels increasingly alien to us. I think I just spent a lot of words to describe a vibe, but I think for me, it's really the vibe, more so than like the body horror or sort of like the AI is going to take over everything. I think for me, it's just that feeling of being unsettled in a space that feels both like you know it and like it contains possibilities that you haven't even imagined yet.
Well, the vibe you're describing that I'm picking up, which I think can be applied to a lot of the films that I'm talking about in the series, and definitely the Blade Runners, is a combination of awe and uncertainty, right? And an uncertainty
Absolutely.
of the most existential kind, where you're uncertain of who is human, but you're also uncertain of what human even means.
Yes.
Because the replicants in both of these films in this world, they're not actually robots, they're not androids. They're not built. I mean, they are, but they're manufactured to be essentially disposable extra humans. And them starting to question that for themselves is what gets us all into a pickle. And what gives us this film.
Yes, that is absolutely all correct. In that it is sort of about that question of, okay, I was built for this and this is like a larger question about humanity too, and like classism, but like I was built for this specific function. How do I break the wheel of that function, right? Like if I deviate off course and I no longer act in the way that I intended to act, if I no longer serve in the way that I am expected to serve, what does that mean about our understanding of humanity, of consciousness, of artificial humanity, of artificial consciousness? All of that stuff sort of becomes wrapped up in these questions. And yeah, that's absolutely the heart of Blade Runner. And it's so funny because, again, just in terms of like the stuff that forms us, our first brushes with technology or with these questions, I do always wonder, do I like this stuff? And then I also like Blade Runner because it's part of this? Or is it because I saw Blade Runner? that this is, you know, what has coded me to this specific type of sci-fi.
We went off the deep end real quick there, but
we did. We really did.
You've just given me the perfect segue. How did you first discover Blade Runner? What's your relationship with the film? Was it the book first? Was it Philip K. Dick's book first? Or was it the film itself?
It was the film first. It was either senior year of high school or maybe freshman year of college, and I have this distinct memory that, okay, again, embarrassing blast of the past, but I remember at that time being very into Daft Punk, and I think there was
not embarrassing at all.
Yeah, I think there was some sort of through line that got me from Daft Punk, and I remember watching like the animated sort of like anime style music videos. I think that somehow got me to Blade Runner, and it must have been college, because I also remember that there was like a college sci-fi sort of course that I was interested in taking and I couldn't get into because it filled up too fast, but I was able to see the syllabus, and I remember it was like a lot of Philip K. Dick and Blade Runner, so I sort of did my own, like, can I at least watch or read the things that are in this syllabus? I'm like listening to Daft Punk, I'm kind of going into this like weird like techno rave space. Can I get into Blade Runner? So it definitely was the movie first, and then it was the book, and then it was like continuing to read more Philip K. Dick books. But I mean, yeah, I think the movie, once you see it, at least for me, it, how do I even say this? I think it's like if you were to see the Marvel movies and you had never seen Star Wars, and then you went back and you saw Star Wars and you were like, oh, all of this is sort of coming from this other place. Or if you had only seen Star Wars and then you saw Dune and you were like, oh, clearly Star Wars was just a copy of Dune. It's like seeing the source thing and then realizing how much it has affected everything else. So there was a lot of that when I first saw Blade Runner, when I was like, oh, I understand now what like The Matrix was doing. I understand what all of these other films were sort of playing in. And I just remember loving it so much, and it being the kind of thing where you puzzle over it, right? Because there are different versions of it. It flopped when it came out. It has this whole cult status. And for a long time, it was sort of on you to be the person saying, well, Deckard is this, Deckard is that. This is what the film was intended to be. This is what it wasn't intended to be. And there was a lot of that sort of engagement with the film, which again, I'm dating us, but that was a thing you did back in the day. So it was a lot of that.
People still do.
I think people do it with like more, in a more annoying way. We did it better.
I was trying to remember, even for myself, because Blade Runner is one of my old-timers. You know, it's a film that I will watch till the end every single time. It always just pauses me in a way that few other films do. I I have kind of this original poster in a place of pride in my house. I rescued it from the bowels of the BFI when I worked there, and it's signed by a bunch of people from the film, and it's tatty and it's beautiful.
Beautiful.
I have a Blade Runner tattoo on me. It was the first tattoo that I ever got. It was like this, it's this thing that's always been in my private circle of pieces of culture that I could never tire of, that I was always puzzling about, that I would always revisit. I could not tell you how I came to Blade Runner. It has one of these positions where I'm like, I don't know when I saw it, how I saw it. Did I see it before Star Wars? Did I see it before Metropolis, after Metropolis? Did I see it in a cinema, on a VHS, on a rented DVD? I could not tell you. I have this complete certainty that it's just always been there, and I've always known it, and I've always seen it, and I've always loved it. It's like it's been implanted in my head like a fake memory.
I love that. That's so fun. I mean, is it something that you could have seen with friends? Like, are you able to, like, create a sphere of influence? Okay, so it was
definitely
you
not, because I all of my film education was mostly solo. I was a very popular kid. But
same. So, you know, I get it.
I think it was the imagery. I want to say I saw the imageries in stills somewhere, like in a film magazine, or like reference somewhere, like on a poster in like one of the geeky shops I used to go to back home. So the imagery was somewhere there, and I kind of knew it. And then when I finally watched the film, it's almost again as if it was always there, and I recognized the images. And since then, every time I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this as though I had seen it in real life. I think the first time I visited LA and finally saw that sprawling city at night, I was like, oh, it's Blade Runner. It's Blade Runner. This is all it is. I'm not even surprised, because I've seen these images so many times.
I love that. Yeah, and it is one of those things too, especially where you get to LA, where you're like, oh, this is what we were talking about. This like vast city where you sort of feel nameless and faceless, and everything is packed together, and you're just sort of irrelevant, but your irrelevance does so much for the film's questions about humanity overall and like the power of the individual. So I've always loved that it is this like sprawling megalopolis, sort of metropolis style city where you probably could live your entire life without ever really being noticed by anyone but your immediate circle. And that, again, just reinforces so much that the film has to say. But yeah, it's so fun thinking about these like classics that have shaped our understandings of everything, and you're like, wait, I don't remember when it happened. It's just always been, the tattoo has always been on your body. It's just always been there.
So broadly speaking, what do you make of the way that technology in the future is presented in Blade Runner?
I mean, all these questions are always so hard.
I'm so sorry, Roxana.
No, it's good. It's good. Because it makes me think about it in a way that I haven't thought about it. I would say that I think broadly, yeah, I'll say this. I would say that I think broadly technology is not presented well. Like, I almost think of Blade Runner, now that we're talking about it in this way, I almost think about it as something like Jurassic Park, where in Jurassic Park, Dr. Ian Malcolm is like, you know, you didn't stop to think if you should. You just did this. You just created dinosaurs because you could. And I feel like there's a part of that in Blade Runner as well, where there is sort of this implication that, like, Tyrell didn't even think about whether this was good or bad. It was just progress. And there is like a level of inherent cruelty there, I think, in the idea that like tech could progress so far that you have just entirely erased the motivations for why it would go there, and sort of erased the moral question of, is this good or is this bad? So in general, I would say I don't really think that it's presented that positively. Like, it's presented very matter of fact in that there are like spaceships.
It's just there
and
everywhere.
It's just there. That like there are spaceships and gigantic monitors and all of that stuff. But also, to your point and what we had just talked about, like society isn't better because of these things. Like Los Angeles is terrible. It's still overcrowded. It's still overpopulated. There are still lots of poor people. I mean, it is not a more egalitarian or better society just because we have figured out a way to make like worker slaves, right? Like things are still pretty bad, if not worse, because now we have like a race of creatures that we created to subjugate.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I've never thought about it in that way. But yeah, I think that would be my read on it.
What I always find, like, what I found really revealing on this watch of the Blade Runners, and I've seen the original Blade Runner many, many times, but when we speak about Blade Runner 2049, that was only the second time I watched it. I only watched it once when it was out in cinemas, so it was a real refresher. But in the original film, more than anything, technology is not only just there, it's also not very helpful, and it's not very appealing. It's a pure replacement of things that used to be there, like plants and animals and food. So it's just there to replicate and substitute the things that have been killed off because of progress. Mm-hmm. And nobody is like having fun with it. There's almost a clunkiness to it, you know, in the technology that Deckard uses and the bounty hunters use to catch the replicants, you know, the testing system they use. It's like really, really not that slick. This is not like a Prometheus Covenant type of situation. Like, this is the cheapest tech that they have. And I feel like nobody's really benefiting from it except Tyrell. And everybody knows that everything is fake and that they're all basically slaves to not just the technology, but the system that has created it. And everything is so completely corporate. Like, it's all ads. It's all like commerce, and it's all dusty and disgusting, and everybody knows it, and everybody's kind of resigned to having to deal with it.
Resigned is such a great term, because I think from sort of the first moment that you see Harrison Ford and also Gosling, you get that sense of like, these characters don't have other options. They have not gone off-world. They are not part of like the colonizing force. Sort of the only option here is to be where they are. So yeah, I love sort of the read of everything is increasingly commodified, which it is, but we're also seeing that trickle so distinctly down on these characters who, from the moment that we meet them, are trapped within that.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Deckard, what do you make of Deckard as a character? But more broadly, how do you think he fits into the Harrison Ford canon of roles?
This is fun to think about. Okay. Broad thoughts about Deckard. Love him as a protagonist because it is Blade Runner really showing how much the film, because I think it is more in the film than in the text. Could be wrong, but I've revisited the film more recently than I've revisited Dick's work. But I think in the character of Deckard, as played by Ford, you are getting more of like the noir overlap. You are getting more of the sort of, to your point, disaffected, resigned cop figure. The sort of very cynical, I've seen it all, I've done it all. There is nothing more for me to be surprised by. And I think that is really interesting when we meet Deckard. That he is just completely nonplussed, I think, by being alive. Like, nothing is really that interesting to him. And on one level, that is, like, what Harrison Ford does really well, right? Like, I think the stereotypical sort of Harrison Ford guy from this era, because of the Han Solo of it all, was a guy who was just really, I guess I would say even-keeled, and I guess I would say, like, pretty cool, like, pretty unflappable, I think.
Roguish.
Which is part of what, like, roguish, exactly, sort of like the charming maverick sort of guy.
Mm-hmm.
But Deckard is not charming. Like, I think that's what I really like, is that it is Ford really tamping down, I think, what he knew to heighten as Han Solo. And it really is a performance that is, like, very much on, like, a very down beat. And Harrison has played, like, outright villains before, of course. And I think a lot of his characters get labeled as, like, anti-heroes. But I really think that it might only apply to Deckard. Like, I really think that it might be his only role that I think about where I'm like, I really don't think that he wants to be heroic at all. Like, Han eventually embraces being a hero, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think that Deckard ever really gets there. I think that he is perpetually consumed by, like, doubt and regret, in the sense that he is just doing all of this because he is expected to do all of this. And I do think, and we'll get to 2049, so I'm sorry to keep bringing it up, but I do think that is what Gosling really gets right, I think, in his performance in that film, is sort of this weight of responsibility as it has been, like, written for you. And I think both of those characters share that sense.
I completely agree with you. I find it really, really interesting because he is known for being either really heroic or really roguish, although I love a Harrison Ford villain. But there's also an element that I've noticed in a lot of his other roles, even when he's playing more of a hero type figure, he's always respected by other characters in a way that Deckard isn't. Deckard is, you know, he's not even the police force, so he's not even respected by them. He's constantly put in his place by other characters. And there's almost a sense of, it's not like he feels a weight of responsibility because he wants to do right by someone or something. It's just that it's the thing that he has to do because he has to do this job. Or, you know, and we can get into the whole, is he a replicant, is he not? But is it the thing that he's programmed to do? So there's this almost resignation of, well, I guess I have to go to work today. I guess I have to feed myself because if not, I'll die. I guess I'll have to go to sleep. And there's nothing really bright or exciting. The only thing that sort of suddenly triggers any sort of interest or light in his character, and that he doesn't know how to deal with, really, is the appearance of Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the thing that disrupts everything. Again, it's the one surprise in what I think is very clearly communicated to us has been, like, many years of no surprise at all. So I would say Rachel is the first surprise, and then I think there is a second surprise that we'll get to. But yeah, I mean, that introduction of Rachel, the test, him realizing that it took her over 100 questions to sort of be pinpointed as a replicant. Like, she upends everything that he thought he knew, right? About the job and about replicants overall. And I think he also, how to phrase this? I think what I've always loved about Rachel's introduction is I think that immediately in that scene, you get a sense of really how evil Tyrell is. And I know that, like, saying evil is, like, a little bit, I don't know, naive maybe. But he's so smug about Rachel. And I feel like it's such a solid performance to immediately let you know that this man is just like, she's my property.
She's my favorite new toy.
She's my favorite new toy.
I made her special. I gave her a nice little outfit.
There's nothing that you can do to change that. Like, I love contrasting him with, like, is it J.R. Sebastian? I'm trying to remember. Later, and how he treats his toys. It's a completely different, I think, sort of attitude. But yeah, I love all of the energies in that scene and just how everyone is, like, sparking off of each other in this really contentious sort of way.
So let's chat a little bit about the replicants, because they are... I find that this film complicates the idea of I don't even know, I've mentioned before that they're not androids, they're not robots, but I think this perhaps is one of the first films that really complicates that idea of, like, what to do or how to present a artificial form of life that looks human but isn't exactly human, or at least is not materialized in the way that humans are born. So what do you make about the way that the Blade Runner world presents replicants, how they're created and how they're treated?
I think what is sort of the obvious thing to talk about is how they're treated. But it's obvious, I say, for me, because I think we've been talking about it this entire time, because it's core to the text. You can't watch Blade Runner and walk away from it being like, no, I think the replicants are, like, treated fine, right? Like, that would be the biggest failure of media literacy. And I think what the movie does so well is, I mean, even in the way that they describe killing the replicants, right? Like, it is retirement. It is, like, being put out of commission. It is in all of these terms that are related to work. They are not related to anything close to personhood or being alive. It is just like, you have a piece of machinery and it stops functioning, so you take it out of commission and get a new one and go about your day. So I think that the script is really purposeful with its language to help you understand the sort of binary that has become regular in this world. I'm assuming all top-down language from Tyrell, right? Mm-hmm. From a company that has sort of taught you how to use its products. We see that more and more, just like being alive in the corporate hellscape in which we live, that a corporation will tell you, this is our preferred nomenclature, this is how we talk about our products. I mean, shit, like iPod, iPad, like, these are not words.
Yeah.
these are like things that we accepted and that sort of changed our vernacular and that we accepted, even with all the connotations. Even though we know that there are probably, like, child factory workers who are toiling on these things for us, that's not baked into the language. The language is something fun to say. Whereas I think, like, replicant and, like, retiring a replicant is, like, very flat. There's no emotionality there. So that's always been something I think more and more when I watch it that I'm impressed by, that sort of, even if you were to take the performances out of it, even if you were to not be able to experience, like, even if you didn't experience, like, Daryl Hannah clearly being treated as like a sex slave, or any of these workers being treated as they are. I think the language itself would give you pause. So I think I have less feelings and emotions about how they're made in the first Blade Runner. And for me, it is more about the impact of, look at this society that has been so striated by this company and how normalized it has become for these creatures who look like us and talk like us and act like us to basically just be like murdered in the street and nobody cares. So I think that part of it has always been what sticks out to me the most.
I really love your point about language, because I also kind of hyper-focused on the way that they were being talked to, but mostly talked about, both in the language that the film gives us, replicants, retirements, etc. But there's also these little details that make it even sadder from a replicant's point of view, because not just the fact that they're created for labor, that they're put in a certain kind of labor role from their moment of creation, like in the case of Daryl Hannah's character. Both female replicants actually are both essentially sex slaves. But also the fact that they're given a life expectancy of 4 years. That they're basically babies, and the moment that they're super intelligent, super strong babies, the moment that they start gaining any self-awareness or developing feelings, their expiration date is gone. So there's this, when I rewatched it for this series, I kept thinking about how desperate it must be to run away from this forced labor that you've been doing since the moment you were like just plunked into the world. And then not only that nobody gives a shit whether you die or not, but the fact that you will die so quickly because it is more, I imagine, cost efficient to have you die after 4 years, just like a goddamn phone.
Yeah, that's totally right. And I mean, they're born as adults, right? Which is also we see in 2049 with that like with that very gross, very viscous birth sequence. But also, yes, to your point that you are born ready to go. You're not allowed that sort of like figuring out yourself, questioning, socialization, coming of age product. You are put on the assembly line, taken off the assembly line, handed to the person who is going to work you, and that's your life. So that's also really fascinating, and that I hadn't exactly thought about the 4-year timeline and how much crueler it is then,
it's so
I think.
cruel.
Yeah, to be like given such a short life and for all of it to be subjugated.
It's that extreme villainy of Tyrell, isn't it? Like, as you mentioned, from the moment you see him, it's like, oh, that's a bad guy. But we're meant to think that the replicants are the villains here? Honey, please. Like, they're little babies who have just run out of their chicken coop, literally. But there's this other thing that I noticed, maybe even for the first time, that they're dolls in the eyes of so many of the different characters, and the way that, and J.R. Sebastian kind of is a doll maker, has all of these cute, weird looking dolls that he's made around his house, and Prim sort of folds herself in so neatly into appearing like one of those dolls, but all of the replicants are treated like these decorative, empty dolls that they're there to be played with and then discarded once they're no longer useful or interesting to the people playing with them. And that, not to get too ahead about 2049, but it's the same element there. Like when that replicant is born in 49, she's kind of squeezed out of a bubble wrap type situation,
Yes.
just like a brand new plastic doll.
It is very literal, which sometimes I think is a flaw of 2049. But exactly like you said, it is an astonishing visual in that it is like this plastic tubing that she is like expelled out of, falls on the ground. It's incredibly violent, and labor and birth are violent, I think, as well in the natural world. So there is some like mimicry there. But like you said, sort of the oddness of seeing an adult in that position, a physical adult, right? Because mentally, like you said, they're probably more at like an adolescent age when we really see them back in Blade Runner. But yeah, I mean, all of that sort of being treated as props and just as things to be maneuvered. I mean, we're really saying variations of the same thing, which is that they're things created to be used. They're not things created to live. And that is really the distinction, I think.
Except our guy, Roy Batty.
Yes, except for what a hottie. I mean, he's right. He's not wrong. I agree with every single opinion that he has. Incredibly hot. I mean,
so much.
What else is there to say? I don't even know.
I mean, Rutger Hauer, beautiful specimen of a man. PhD, isn't he, as well?
I think so, yeah.
I think he's a PhD. Just gorgeous delivery of the monologue. Maniacal, so elegant, so compelling. I love a villain with a mission. I don't care how petty it is. Just, I have a thing to do and I will not stop until I do it. I shall not be distracted. And my thing is, I want to kill my dad. I love him so much.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, I think that so much of that performance also works because it is in such a different register than Harrison's. I mean, I'm gonna say some stuff that probably is like very superficial, but I think it's rare to see a Harrison Ford movie in which another character is like the more manly, more masculine, more realized in terms of being a man's man. Like I've repeated myself now with these three phrases, but I'm trying to get at something, right? Which is that I think it's rare for Harrison Ford to be like outclassed as a guy in a movie. Like it's like how it's that long running rumor, which I think is true, which is that like The Rock has a thing in his contract that he can't ever lose a fight on screen. Yeah. Like, you know, it's very similar to me in that it's like Harrison Ford always has to be like the big dicked dude on screen. And I love how much in this early era of Harrison, he just allows himself to be completely overwhelmed by Hauer's performance, right? Like, I really think that it's Roy Batty who endures out of this movie. Like, I think if the movie were more clear about whether Deckard is a human or a replicant, I really don't think that people would, like, think about his character as much. Whereas I really feel like it is Roy Batty's struggle and tragedy and attempt to be seen and recognized, and just like his desire to kill in order to get all of those things that I think are the most compelling, crisply rendered, beating heart part of this film for me. It's hard for me to think in this moment right now for like a better sci-fi villain who the whole time you're just like, well, he's right. I don't see what the problem is.
He's right. He's also hot. I don't know
Yeah,
what
I
is the
understand.
issue. Like,
What's
let him
the
live.
issue? What's the
Let him live.
problem?
I genuinely like weeped this time whenever I watched the film.
Mhm.
What a performance! What a mensch! I love your point about him out manlying Harrison Ford in this. But I think there's something else. I think I'm gonna say something. I think Roy Batty is the best version of Frankenstein's creature that I've seen.
100. So smart. So true.
He is beautiful and grotesque, and he is so desperate for the approval, but also for the destruction of his creator, who does not give a shit about him. Categorically does not care. Even less so than Victor Frankenstein. But there's this fire of him knowing that it's completely meaningless whether he kills Tyrell or not, because he will not stop the machinery. But there's this desire for his memories, the things that he's seen, the awesome things that he's seen, that he recounts, to not just disappear, for them to have a continuation of some kind, a legacy, a fingerprint to be left behind. And that is just such a profound villain statement. You know, it's not even, oh, I want to kill someone. Yes, I do. But really, I just want to live and for my life to matter.
Yeah.
How is that bad?
How is that bad? Like, I don't think it is. And I think that is, like, I think that is part of what makes Blade Runner so enduring. And I do think that this is part of what makes 2049 a bit of a letdown, because I don't think you get a villain better than Roy in terms of having like all of those stakes and desires and wants made so sympathetic, you know? And so I really don't think 2049 has any answer for that, truly. And I think that's why the movie takes an entirely different tactic about trying to figure out what humanity is in Gosling's K. But I don't think that you get better than Roy. I think probably I can't say anything thoughtful about like the improvised monologue, just because it's so beautiful and it's one of the most enduring things in cinema, right? So like, what else can
Just
I say about
no
Tears
notes.
and Rain? 5 stars, no notes. Amazing. I mean, More Life Fucker versus More Life Father. Both versions are
good.
Great. Both are good. So yeah, it's one of those things where you can point, I think, so many moments from this performance that have just become iconic. I mean, even before the Tears and Rain, the physicality of that rooftop fight. And again, just how much Roy Batty is kicking Deckard's ass. And to your point, the Frankenstein's monster of it all, the fact that he feels like a force that cannot be stopped and that is sort of invigorated by this, I don't even know, like unholy, unnatural, but so unnatural that it is natural kind of life. Like everything about Roy is a transgression upon what we think about, like, the physical form and its limitations, but that's also what makes him so perfect as a character.
I love that. And I think the absence of a figure like Roy Batty is a good segue into talking about the sequel. But before we move on, I have to ask, do we care whether Deckard is a replicant or not?
I care in that I think that he is. I think it's a better movie if he is, because I think it echoes the sort of questions that the film is asking the entire time about whether we know ourselves. And I think that the film is sort of making this implicit claim that the replicants are better, I think, on a level than humans because they know who they are and they have a sort of self-awareness that I think precludes them from getting caught up in like the same kind of delusions as humanity, right? And I think that's why like Roy confronting Tyrell is so good, because I think Tyrell has convinced himself that he's better than the replicants, right? Because he created them. And I think everything about Roy is saying, like, you believe that, but that's not true because I'm gonna crush your skull with my hands, right? Like, it is like, it is very much this discussion of like objectivity versus subjectivity. And so I think for Deckard to be a replicant and not know it, I think speaks to sort of all of those questions and to like how has he been conditioned to not know. And it gives like an additional nefarious quality, I think, to humanity in the film, that they're willing to use replicants for these dirty jobs because it wouldn't be appropriate for a human to do it. Like, I think all of that sort of reverberates more if he's a replicant. But I'm really curious if you have a take on this, if you're on a different side.
Well, I'm not, because I agree with you that it's a better story if he's a replicant.
Yeah.
And what I do enjoy, and this is why I phrased this as do we care? What I do enjoy is the fact that it does not affect my relationship with the film, whether he's a replicant or not. And I find it slightly... You know, I love it when a film asks questions, and I love it when the film and the filmmakers do not agree on the answer to those questions. So for me, it actually doesn't matter that much whether he's a replicant or not, because I think the debate, especially even the debate between Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford, and the fact that that tension is inbuilt into the way that the film is made, is in the film, means that there is not a categorical answer. And we can decide on whatever makes the movie better for us. For me, similarly to you, the fact that he's a replicant makes it better because it makes the world even crueler than it already is. If Deckard is a replicant, it is so unbelievably strategically cruel to employ and create replicants who, contrary to the ones who escaped, the rebel ones, do not know what they are. So they are implanted with memories that give them the illusion of humanity, and then they just die. Because the specialness, in air quotes, of Rachel is that she doesn't have an expiration date. She can live as long as she lives. We can assume that Deckard has a similar expiration date to the other replicants, but he's meant to think that he has memories and has lived a life and is a person. That is almost as cruel as the world in which the Roy Batty's exist and the Prims. And if it is such a complete bleak vision of technology and humanity and this post-capitalist world where everything has been sold, including life, and everything has been destroyed and eradicated and replaced by ads and digital screens, that makes sense. It's in line with the cruelty of the world in which Blade Runner exists. However, the fact that Harrison Ford deliberately played Deckard as a human and continues to, I think maybe this has changed since 2049, continues to say that he played him as a human being instead of a replicant because he wanted audiences to attach themselves to at least one human figure in the film. I'm like, the tension is then inbuilt in the film itself, right? Because if you're being directed to act like you're a replicant, but you're playing it as a human, that is perfect for Deckard, because he is a character who doesn't know what he is or who he is or what he wants or if he even wants anything. And when he wants something and he wants Rachel, he takes it by force and aggressively. And I think that is also an element of like, well, are you a replicant because you don't know how to handle emotion because you are a baby creature, really, that's only lived 3 years? Or are you a cruel man who thinks that this this creature in front of you, as beautiful as she is and as much as you want her, does not deserve respect or does not have the ability to give you consent because you can just take her in the way that all of the other people around her take her.
Oh, this is so true. I'm fascinated by, I mean, I know that Harrison has said that he played Deckard as a human, which, like, whatever, shut up, Harrison. But I love the spin that you're putting on it in terms of, like, if you're saying it like that, how does that complicate the relationship that occurs between them? Because is he taking advantage of her in a way that isn't necessarily dissimilar, I think, from the other way that, like, replicants have been sort of, like, fetishized in this world? That opens, like, all kinds of questions. I love that.
That's why I love this fucking movie, man. So let's talk about the sequel. And
yeah,
since we're both hardcore Blade Runner nerds, do you remember how you felt about the very idea of a sequel to Blade Runner?
I had, I think, sort of mixed feelings, but ultimately excited feelings, because I am a hardcore Ryan Gosling baby. I was very excited by his casting. I'm trying to remind myself when this was in Denis' filmography and what it was after. Okay, so Denis had done Prisoners, which I liked, Sicario, which I liked. Okay, it was post-Arrival, and I liked Arrival. So I think all of that made me somewhat excited for Denis from a visual perspective. Just pinpointing that this was, like, pre-Dune, before I fully turned on this man. But yeah, I think that I was excited by the Gosling-Denis combo. I think inherently, though, there was a question of why does this need to exist? Because I think Blade Runner works so well in such a contained way. So I would say I was, like, mixed to excited. My partner was, like, not that pressed. He is really the true Blade Runner fan. I would say between us, it is probably his favorite movie of all time. He has read the book many times. So he was very like, this does not need to exist. And I think I was more optimistically like, maybe it'll be good. And complicated feelings after it came out. But I think that was the initial, maybe it'll work. And I will say, the trailer, when it came out, the trailer was beautiful. Like, the trailer also had me thinking, like, visually this will be stupendous, which it was. But I do know that this is a movie with, like, a lot of stuff to work through.
Yeah, similarly to you, I remember being optimistic before watching it. For one very simple reason. I had never experienced a Blade Runner on the big screen. As in, like, a Blade Runner that I had not seen already. So the idea of being in that world, but that world being new, of that world being unexplored, of not knowing what it held, of not having to go back to the Philip K. Dick book, of not having to go back to the Ridley Scott movie, be like, what else? What wonders could you hold for me in this world? And I really like Denis' previous work, and he is a true fan, both of Dune and of Blade Runner. So it's like, okay, so this is a guy who not only knows how to do big, ambitious, morally complicated sci-fi. It's not just things flying around and pew-pews.
Right.
But he also knows the text and what is he gonna do with it? And similarly to, I remember very vividly where I was watching this and I was stony faced the entire time. I was sitting at the BFI IMAX, which is the biggest screen in the UK. It's this enormous screen. I deliberately wanted to go there to see it, to be like, I want it big. I want to be in Blade Runner. And I was like, I cannot believe how they massacred my boy. I cannot believe what they did. What is Ana de Armas doing here? What is this like whole obsession with fertility and uteruses? What is this baby Jesus metaphor happening? Why have we done this? Those are my feelings.
That was a lot. That was so many feelings. Okay, I'm curious how you want to structure breaking down our feelings, because I think my feelings have shifted a lot over time. And I think that let me start with the things that I did not like, which is that in general, I did not like Jared. I didn't like Leto's performance. I did not think that sort of reimagining of what Tyrell was doing made sense. I did not like that aspect of it. I don't like the Rachel hologram thing. I feel like that is grasping too much at connecting it with the first film. I ultimately think that this movie, and this goes back to what you were saying about sort of like fertility, is I actually think that it is a pretty interesting question of if you are trying to find a new way of creating like a group or a race or a creature or whatever, I do think that we culturally are locked into like fertility questions. And I do think a film that suggests like women are again, to use like the idea of fetishization, like if women are fetishized and othered for their ability to give birth, I think it's sort of an interesting thing to accept like the sex work sort of the first film, to change it from being like subjugation and oppression to making it more like matter-of-fact sex work, and to shift your focus about women's bodies from sexual activity to reproduction. I think that is sort of an interesting way to reframe the replicants, and especially like the female replicant and what the body is capable of. However, I also think, and forgive me if this is just stepping or repeating what you already said, I also think that sort of the movie falls into like the most simplistic ways of handling Blade Runner's themes. So it becomes like, what's humanity? Humanity is the ability to have children. Humanity is the ability to reproduce. Therefore, replicants having children means they're closer to humans. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it all becomes, exactly I think it all becomes like about the utilitarianism of the body, and I'm not necessarily sure that like the first Blade Runner was about that. I don't know if the first Blade Runner was about like what the body can do so much as what the body represents. So I feel like the second movie, and I think I like 2049. Like, I have gone on record as defending it numerous times, including like in a Vulture conversation we did. But I think I like it for everything but that. I think I like it for Kay and for what the film is saying about specialness and how you can try to make yourself of use and still be someone doing good things in the world, even if you're not quote unquote like the chosen one. I think that's a really interesting sort of like bizarro version of Deckard. Like it's sort of like an inside out version of Deckard where you're learning that you're not special, but you still have the ability to make change. I think that's interesting. I think Gosling does that well. I think visually it's beautiful. Bleh. But there is sort of like half of a movie here that I really am unmoved by. And then half of a movie where I'm like, this is saying such interesting things about like our fantasies of what life is supposed to be like. And I love that you bring up Anna de Armas because I actually think that she's pretty good as this like robotic girlfriend that's yearning to be alive. Like I think her storyline and Gosling's character, both as being these two not real quote-unquote figures that can experience real emotions for each other, that's like the closest thing, I think, to the original Blade Runner for me. And all of the rest of it is sort of like, I don't know, like Leto's character, I don't know. I think that Love, his like enforcer, doesn't make sense to me as a character. I don't think I like Robin Wright as the cop. But there's just a lot of like, I'm going to say something that is so unfeminist. This movie has a lot of actresses, and I don't think that it has a lot of female characters. Let me put it that way.
That's such an interesting point.
So, like, there is, you know, like, the head of the Replicant Revolution is played by Hiem Abbas. She is amazing. I think that she does great work in, like, the 2 seconds she's on screen. But I really have no clue what Love's character is supposed to represent. I don't know what Robin Wright's police captain is supposed to represent. So it's a very odd film. And now I've monologued for a really long time. But do you think that there's anything here that speaks to you? Or is it all sort of a wash?
Well, like I mentioned before, rewatching it for this episode was the first time that I watched it since 2017.
Yeah.
And I was steadying myself to experience that disappointment again. But I didn't. So I'm a lot warmer in the film now. I appreciate a lot of the things that it's doing. And actually, similarly to you, one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting theme for me that seemed genuinely to be making an interesting point and expanding on the ideas of the original Blade Runner was on this notion of, can two AI fall in love? Do we even need a human in this equation? You know, Deckard and Rachel, technically in the first film, apparently that got off screen, became a very big love. Kay and Joy in the sequel, you know, the Ryan Gosling and Anna de Armas characters, they are unequivocally, you know, replicants and digi, so like a holographic girlfriend. But their feelings are presented as being very real, and their loss, especially when Joy is destroyed, when she dies, that is played like a death scene, and Gosling plays it as such. And I think the way that they play it as a genuine relationship is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Because again, it's nothing, you know, people fall in love every day, like it's nothing special, but for them it's this one beacon in a otherwise similarly very gloomy LA. You know, the very brutal environment, this reluctancy that Harrison Ford had in the original, I think Gosling just nails and takes up several notches, because this is a replicant that knows he's a replicant, and he has to go back and eat his slop and look through his fake window and be in his little tiny brutalist apartment every day, day in, day out. There's no excitement there. There's no emotion. The only sparkle there is his AI girlfriend. And I think there's something really fascinating about this idea of two artificial creatures developing genuine feelings. Like, that is the way that they self-actualize in a way that is completely out of the control of the Wallaces or Tyrells of the film. except that, and that is how they try to get at Kay, don't they? They try to take away Joy and use her against him, in a really classic movie maneuver.
Yeah, and can I say one thing too? I think that they are. I really go back and forth about whether they're in love also. Because I remember she is an AI who is at his behest, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
She is not alive, quote unquote, or she is not turned on when he is not home. So she tells him when she's on that she wants to be with him and that she has genuine feelings for him as well. But like, we can't know that. So I do think that that is one of the more fascinating things of the film, again, because it is getting at this question of like, what emotions do we accept as genuine and real, and how does commerce and the process of being bought or sold play into that? Because Joy is a product, right? Like, she also has been created for a specific purpose. So I think that's the part of the movie where, like, you can really dig into these questions of, in one way, it is a Blade Runner reprise if we accept that they were both replicants and they developed human or genuine emotions for each other. They had a child. All of this is like within the 2049 text. But I think if you wanted to look at it a different way, like you said, you could look at Kay and Joy as being their own sort of version of, if Deckard had been human, is he raping Rachel, right? Like, so it is like really fascinating to sort of question that. But yeah, man, like, I don't care about the Wallace stuff at all.
Oh my God.
I don't.
Can I go on a little anti-Jared Leto rant? Just a really small one. I think that you
absolutely should. The only thing that I will say before is Dave Bautista, innocent. Love the opening of this film. Bautista
beautiful man.
Is exceptional. There are a lot of really good performances here, but the worst by far is Jared, and I'd love to hear you talk about how much he sucks.
I in general, not a fan of him as an actor. I think he is deeply untalented and has no range. I think he really confuses what acting means and what a good performance is with pyrotechnics. And I think he's doing the same here. And I don't think he understands the villainy of a Wallace character in the way that, oh my God, I forgot the name, but the actor who plays Tyrell in the original, you know, the minute he comes on scene, like you said, you're like, oh, this guy does not care whether anyone lives or dies. Everyone is a toy. Everyone is a number. And he doesn't need to do much to communicate that. And I think Wallace is so over the top. It's so trad. It's so boring. And he does this thing where he's like, he's like Brian Johnson it before Brian Johnson was a thing. You know, he's like, oh, I've given myself little uplifts. I've given myself like little robot eyes, and I've got a special little implant here. And like, I'm trying to make replicants who can have babies. So I'm just going to dispose of this random woman replicant. Then I'm going to open out of her box and then immediately cut her. It's just, it's such unsubtlety in the performance and in the character. I'm like, this is not scary. This is just douchey. We all know you're a douche in real life and you like playing douche characters, and you can't even do that right, because all I'm saying is like, oh, just fuck off. Just don't, I don't care about your secret plan.
Unsubtlety is such a great way to put. I mean, there is nothing about Blade Runner, OG Blade Runner, that to me is boring. Whereas I think you got it exactly right. Whereas the Jared Leto performance, the like whisper, the hoarse whisper, and sort of the physicality, the fact that they dressed him in like vaguely Asian clothing, it's just all incredibly boring. It does not have this is a groundbreaking, trailblazing sci-fi quality of Blade Runner. The worst parts of Blade Runner 2049 show the fact that it is a movie coming out, 30, what is time? 35? some decades later. Some decades later, but also very far into the legacy that Blade Runner already made. So, like, as beautiful as 2049 is, and I think visually it's very beautiful. I think Kay dying in the snow, gorgeous. I don't think that it offers the same level of, this is something I'm going to be thinking about forever. And I also think that outside of the relationship between Kay and Joy, I do think that it like really loses the sort of class element that I think is inherent to Blade Runner and that I think is inherent to some sci-fi in general. I'm going to paraphrase an idea and sort of steal a concept from someone. But we are recording this on the day of the second season finale of the Apple TV Plus show Severance. Very popular sci-fi horror, all of that stuff. And I have a friend, Erin Beatty, who wrote a piece today about how season 2 of this show really lost the class consciousness of season 1. And I retweeted it saying something like, what's really interesting is that the first season of this show is all about the fact that if you have lost romantic love or are not in the position to pursue romantic love, you can still find these really dynamic, fulfilling, inspiring relationships with your coworkers in terms of like solidarity and communion. Whereas the second season of this show really regresses us back to the idea that romantic love is the only true thing with which you can define yourself. And as we're talking about this, I'm wondering how much that could also be applied to like Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, because as much as the Rachel and Deckard relationship in the first film is of course important, I completely agree, you do have this uprising from these 4 replicants, and through them, I think the film is making like a very distinct point, as you said, about like technology and its intersection with humanity and like the horror applications there. Whereas I think the second film, in really structuring itself around 2 romances, around Kay and Joy, and around the lingering impact of Rachel and Deckard and their child, like it really gets rid of, or to your point, makes very rote the question of like, what does this kind of world actually do for us as people? What is it like to move through this space? What is it like to be living in a system in which you see that certain creatures are disposable and you understand that you too could be disposable? And so I really think that Blade Runner, I think, gets that implicitly. 2049, I think, gets slivers of that through Kay. But mostly, I don't know if it gets that. You know what I mean? I'm not sure.
I know what you mean. It's a film that left me with the wrong kind of questions. Because I think it asks them, but it doesn't know what the point is that it's trying to make. I really love what you were saying before about Kay's arc being realizing that he's not special. The disappointment. I mean, there is a hilarity in the way that Gosling plays the scene where he finds out that he's not, in fact, the prophet baby of the replicants. And he just screams. I'm like, you would not do that. A replicant would not do that. But a character realizing that he is, in fact, not the chosen one is a much more interesting journey for me than someone realizing they're Luke Skywalker again. You know? It's so much better and for us to actually not really have that many interactions with the real child of Deckard and Rachel. Love it. Just give me a glimpse of her. Give me a glimpse of the way that she's had to live her life and how she's also part of the system, even if she's sort of in a bubble. But this idea of how does just a regular old Joe replicant live?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of time that we spend on the routine of Kay, I greatly enjoy. I think that was my favorite
Yes.
part of Blade Runner 2049, is actually spending a lot of time with the replicant in his day-to-day, on his job, the way he does things, his meetings with his boss, his one-on-ones, his like meals that he makes, the showers he takes. I'm like, truly, this is a slice of life. This is a replicant Jean Dielman approach. And I wish that we had stayed more with Kay peeling potatoes rather than going off and having a shootout.
Yes, I think that is exactly correct. I think that what I really love, if I were to pinpoint one specific thing, is also a K thing, and I think it is the baseline cells interlinked test. Because I think that, to me, understood and sort of spoke to the rhythm and discipline with which he lives his life, as you said, like the everyday nature of what it is to be Kay. But I also think it gets to that like alien, other, rhythmic quality that tells you that he's a replicant in a way that a human would understand, right? And I love that like it's Nabokov, and I just think that it's one of the few really like thoughtful, I mean, I'm sure Denis thought about this a lot, but for me it's one of the few very like thoughtful things that I think has impact. And yeah, so I really love that. I mean, it's a really good Gosling performance, and in a film that I think is surrounded by like not great characterizations.
Yeah. And if anything, it gave us one of my favorite pieces of internet content, which is the Alison Hammond interview with Ryan Gosling and Harrison Ford.
Yes.
Which is a clip that I rewatch on a weekly basis. But
I always think, I mean, as you know this too, Harrison Ford always looks like he's being held hostage. And so there is like...
I don't love that about him.
Yeah, and so it's very fun to sort of see that energy like upended. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, what's frustrating is that even as we're having this conversation and I'm like, man, 2049 is not that great, I'm still like, maybe I should just rewatch the Gosling parts. Like, is that...
I will say, I did, in the same way that, you know, we talked a little bit about the Harrison Ford style of character. This film seems to come before Gosling gave up. Mm-hmm. It's like one of the last films he made along with First Man before he just decided to take the money and provide for his children. I wonder kind of, what do you think? I agree. I think it's a great performance, and I really love him. I've loved him as an actor for a very long time, and I think he is phenomenal at so many things. He is what Jared Leto wishes he could be and will never be. And I wonder, what do you think Kay sits in the Ryan Gosling side of performance and characters?
I mean, I think that it's exactly a performance of a character that Gosling is very good at. I did like a ranked list of all Gosling performances, and I don't remember exactly. Yeah, I don't remember. I think this was like top 10, but you know, this is very much like in his bag of like sort of emotionally repressed, silent, still bursts of violence characters. Very First Man, very Place Beyond the Pines. And so, like, I love Gosling in that register. I, of course, also love him as, like, a comedic doofus. But I think that he has, like, a level, again, to go back to, like, I always think with this Leto performance, he is trying so hard to be menacing and intimidating that it becomes caricature. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think Gosling has just like a level of interiority here where, like you said, through those like domestic rituals, we're able to understand an internal life. And so I think that it is, again, like a very strong performance within a film that I think they figured out Kay. And I think that his, exactly like you said, realizing that he is not the guy, I think that is fascinating. And I think Gosling is probably one of the few actors who could pull off that level of, like, disappointment, but also, like, the physicality of he's going to keep going and he's not going to let himself be stopped. So yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the only, I really think that Gosling's like one of the only people who could do this, and he's not trying to be Harrison Ford. Whereas I think, like you said, Leto is trying for something very stereotypically villainous, and I don't think Gosling is trying for stereotype at all.
Roxana, I'm very grateful for your time, and I think we've done both the Blade Runners justice. If anything, I think we've thought a lot more about Blade Runner 2049 than some of the people in it have thought about it. But is there anything about either of these films that you wanted to add before I let you go?
I don't think so. I think we did. I think we got a lot of it. I'm trying to think of if there's anything else that I want to say, but I feel like we really covered it, and we managed to get some, like, Denis and Jared Leto shade in there as well. I think we did the best that we could.
I will not shade Denis. I still love Denis.
I will shade Denis. I will shade Denis. That's fine.
I would cross the road if I saw Jared Leto coming towards me, but I'm still in the Denis camp.
Okay. I'm not going to argue with you on that.
Listen, I will read your shade. I'm sure you've written extensive takedowns of Denis, and I will read them.
Well, thank you for that.
On that note, where can people find more of your work online? Yes,
you can find me and my 2 lengthy essays about how Denis failed Dune at Vulture, at New York Magazine. I'm also still on X, and I'm on Blue Sky. So you can find me at all of the places where you can find a person who isn't terminally online, but is probably still too online.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.